Isabel Belle Beauregard spat tobacco juice at the Union cavalryman's boots. "Yankee pig," she hissed, the dust of Martinsburg clinging to her threadbare gray dress. He chuckled, a low guttural sound that vibrated in the humid Virginia air. "Feisty one, aren't you, Southern Belle? Thought you ladies were all sugar and smiles." He gestured to the retreating column of blue uniforms. "Seems your boys are running scared." "Just like always." Belle's hands clenched into fists, the knuckles white. "They'll be back. You just wait. The South will rise again. Sure it will," he drawled, his eyes raking over her. "Maybe after you sweet-talk all our secrets out of us. What's a pretty thing like you doing so close to the lines anyway? Looking for customers?" A wave of fury washed over Belle, hot and stinging. It wasn't the first time they'd implied it. Her reputation, already precarious after a series of chance encounters with Union officers, was crumbling under the weight of suspicion. "Get off my property," she said, her voice trembling but hard. He didn't move. "Just delivering a message. General Fremont wants to see you. Seems he has a proposition for you." He grinned, a flash of white teeth against sun-darkened skin. "Something tells me you'll find it. Agreeable. Agreeable?" Belle repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "Tell General Fremont he can keep his proposition. I have no interest in anything he has to offer." The soldier chuckled, a low, rumbling sound in his chest. "Don't be so hasty, Miss Boyd. The general is a powerful man. Refusing him could have consequences." He leaned closer, the smell of sweat and gun oil thick in the air. Especially for someone already under suspicion, Belle stood her ground, refusing to flinch. "I'm not afraid of General Fremont or any of you." Even as she said the words, a knot of fear tightened in her stomach. Fremont's reputation preceded him. He was known for his ruthless efficiency and his willingness to bend or break any rule to achieve his goals. "That's what they all say," he said, straightening up. "Just think about it. A little cooperation could make things a lot easier for you. Maybe even clear your name." He tipped his hat, a mocking gesture of politeness. "We'll be back tomorrow. He expects an answer." With that, he turned and rejoined his men, who mounted their horses and rode off, leaving Belle standing alone in the dust. She watched them disappear down the road, her mind racing. Fremont's proposition could mean anything. Information, access, even something more. The thought made her skin crawl. But the alternative, continued suspicion, harassment, maybe even imprisonment, was equally terrifying. Belle knew she was walking a tightrope. One wrong step could send her tumbling into ruin. She needed to be careful, to think strategically. She couldn't afford to let her anger cloud her judgment. Turning, she went back inside the house, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Maria, her loyal maid, was waiting for her, her face etched with worry. "What did they want, Miss Belle?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Nothing good, Maria," Belle said, forcing a smile. "But don't you worry. I'll handle it." She went to her room and sank onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. She needed a plan. She couldn't simply refuse Fremont outright. That would be too dangerous. She needed to buy time to assess the situation, to figure out what Fremont really wanted and how she could use it to her advantage. An idea began to form in her mind, a risky, audacious plan that could either save her or destroy her. She would play the game. She would meet with Fremont, listen to his offer, and pretend to consider it. She would use her charm and wit to gain his trust, to learn his secrets. And then, when the time was right, she would betray him. It was a dangerous game, but Belle was no stranger to danger. She had been raised in the South, taught to be strong and resourceful, to fight for what she believed in. And she believed in the Confederacy, in the right of her people to govern themselves. She rose from the bed, her eyes filled with determination. She would not be intimidated. She would not be bullied. She would use every weapon at her disposal, her beauty, her intelligence, her courage, to protect herself and to serve her cause. The next day, the Union soldiers returned. This time they were more numerous, and their leader was not the same rough-looking sergeant. This was an officer, tall and imposing, with a stern face and piercing blue eyes. "Miss Boyd," he said, dismounting and approaching her gate. "I am Captain Thornton. General Fremont requests your presence at his headquarters. He has sent a carriage for you." Belle hesitated for only a moment. This was it. The moment of truth. "Very well, Captain," she said, her voice steady. Tell the general I will be there. Very well, Captain, she said, her voice steady. Tell the general I will be there. As the carriage rattled along the dusty road towards Martinsburg, Belle studied the passing landscape. Familiar fields now occupied. Homes shuttered and silent. The weight of occupation settled upon her like a shroud. She straightened her spine, refusing to be cowed. This was a battle, and she would fight it on her terms. The Union headquarters, once a grand private residence, now buzzed with activity. Soldiers milled about, their blue uniforms a stark contrast to the stately white columns and manicured lawns. She was led inside through a maze of corridors, until finally she stood before a large oak door. Miss Boyd, Captain Thornton announced, his voice clipped. General Fremont will see you now. The door swung inward, revealing a large office dominated by a massive desk piled high with papers. Behind it sat General Fremont, a man of renowned if somewhat tarnished reputation. He rose as she entered, a faint smile playing on his lips. Miss Boyd, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Please come in. I understand you've been troublesome. He gestured to a chair. Do sit down. Belle moved with a grace that belied her inner turmoil. She perched on the edge of the offered seat, her eyes meeting his. General, she replied, her voice clear and unwavering, I am merely defending my home. Fremont chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Defense, Miss Boyd? Or defiance? Your reputation precedes you. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an unnerving intensity. They say you're a firebrand, a rebel through and through. People say many things, General. Most of them are untrue. Belle kept her expression neutral. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. He steepled his fingers, his gaze unwavering. I understand you overheard a conversation. Something about troop movements? I heard voices, Belle said, carefully choosing her words. In my own home. Is a woman not allowed to listen in her own parlor? Fremont's smile widened, a hint of steel in his eyes. Indeed. But hearing and understanding are two different things, Miss Boyd. And conveying that understanding, that's where things become complicated. He paused, letting the word hang in the air. Tell me, Miss Boyd, what did you understand? Belle met his gaze, her mind racing. She couldn't reveal too much. Not yet. She needed to gauge his intentions, to understand what he knew. I understood that the Union Army intends to continue its presence in our town. Fremont laughed, a short, sharp burst of sound. A masterful understatement, Miss Boyd. You are indeed quick-witted. But I suspect you know far more than you're letting on. Let's be frank. You are suspected of aiding the Confederacy. Belle remained silent, refusing to confirm or deny. We have evidence, witnesses, circumstantial perhaps, but enough to warrant further investigation. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I could have you imprisoned, Miss Boyd, or worse. A shiver ran down Belle's spine, but she held her ground. And what would that accomplish, General? Would silencing me somehow win you the war? He smiled again, a slow, predatory smile. Perhaps not, but it would certainly simplify things. However, he paused for effect. I am a man of reason. I believe in second chances. And I also believe that you, Miss Boyd, are a woman of considerable... Belle's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what was coming. This was the game, the dangerous dance she had to play. I need information, Miss Boyd, Fremont continued, his eyes fixed on hers. Information about Confederate troop movements. About their plans. About their weaknesses. Belle said nothing. In return, he said, leaning even closer, I can offer you protection from the unpleasantness you have already experienced, from further accusations, from imprisonment. He waited, his gaze unwavering. The air in the room crackled with unspoken tension. Belle took a deep breath. This was it. The moment of decision. She could refuse, face the consequences, and likely end up in a Union prison. Or she could play along, feign cooperation, and use her position to gather information for the Confederacy. It was a dangerous game. But she was willing to play it. What kind of information are you looking for, General? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. A slow smile spread across Fremont's face. The kind that wins wars, Miss Boyd. The kind that keeps my men alive. The kind that secures my position in this conflict. He stood up and walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. He towered over her, his presence imposing and intimidating. "I want to know everything, Miss Boyd," he said, his voice low and husky. "Everything you know, everything you hear, everything you see." He reached out and gently touched her cheek. "And in return, I will ensure your comfort." Belle forced herself not to flinch. She met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a carefully crafted mixture of fear and compliance. "I will do my best, General," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have no doubt you will, Miss Boyd," Fremont said, his smile widening. "I have no doubt at all." He withdrew his hand and stepped back. "Captain Thornton will escort you home. I look forward to our next conversation." As she was led away, Belle's mind raced. She had bought herself some time, but she knew that she was walking a tightrope. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and she would fall. Back in the carriage, she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Fremont was dangerous, intelligent, and utterly ruthless. He saw her as a pawn, a means to an end, but she would show him that she was more than that. She would use his arrogance, his lust for power against him. She would play the game, and she would win. When Belle arrived back at her home, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. Eliza rushed out to greet her, her face etched with worry. "Belle, are you all right? What did they do to you?" Belle embraced her friend tightly. "I'm fine, Eliza, just tired." "Tired? They dragged you off to their headquarters." "What did Fremont want?" Belle led her inside, closing the door behind them. "He wants information," she said, her voice low. "He thinks I can help him." Eliza's eyes widened in horror. "Belle, you wouldn't." "I played along, Eliza," Belle said, cutting her off. "I had to. It was the only way to protect myself. And us. But what are you going to do? You can't actually help them." Belle shook her head. "Of course not. But I can pretend. I can feed them false information, lead them astray. And while I'm doing that, I can gather intelligence for the Confederacy." Eliza stared at her, her mouth agape. "Belle, that's incredibly dangerous." "I know," Belle said, her voice firm. "But it's also necessary. We have to do everything we can to help our cause." She looked at Eliza, her eyes filled with determination. "Are you with me?" Eliza hesitated for only a moment. "Always," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "Always." That night, as Belle lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. The faces of the Union soldiers, the stern gaze of Captain Thornton, the predatory smile of General Fremont, all swirled in her mind. She knew that she was in a dangerous game, a game where the stakes were life and death, but she was determined to play it to the best of her ability. She would use her charm, her intelligence, her courage to outwit the enemy and to protect her home. She would become a shadow, a whisper in the night, a thorn in the side of the Union Army. She was Belle Boyd, and she was ready for war. Belle finally drifted off, but her sleep was restless, plagued by vivid dreams of battlefields and betrayals. When the first rays of dawn kissed the horizon, she rose, determined to put her plan into action. She started small, using her quick wit and southern charm to glean information from Union soldiers billeted in the town. A misplaced word here, an unguarded comment there, she pieced together troop movements, supply lines, and the general mood of the occupying force. It was like gathering crumbs, but Belle knew that even crumbs could feed a revolution. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Captain Thornton, ever watchful, seemed to appear whenever Belle was in conversation with Union soldiers. His eyes, cold and assessing, followed her every move. He clearly suspected something but lacked proof. This cat-and-mouse game added another layer of tension to her already fraught existence. One afternoon, while innocently sketching in the town square, Belle overheard two Union officers discussing a planned reconnaissance mission. They spoke in hushed tones, but her sharp ears caught enough to understand that a large contingent of soldiers would be leaving the following morning, heading towards a vital Confederate supply depot. This was a significant opportunity. If she could get this information to the right people, it could save lives and cripple the Union advance. But how? Getting a message through Union lines was a perilous task. She knew she needed Eliza's help. Slipping away from Captain Thornton's watchful gaze, Belle found her friend tending to the wounded in a makeshift hospital. "Eliza," she whispered, pulling her aside. I have information, important information, but I need a way to get it to Colonel Turner. Eliza's eyes widened. What is it? Belle quickly recounted what she had overheard. They're planning a reconnaissance mission towards the depot. If we can warn them... It's too risky, Eliza said, her voice laced with concern. If you're caught, we have to try, Belle insisted. Too much is at stake. Eliza thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. There's old Moses, she said finally. He's a freed slave, knows these woods like the back of his hand. He sometimes delivers messages for the Confederacy. If anyone can get through, it's him. Where can I find him? Belle asked, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Eliza gave her directions to a small cabin on the outskirts of town. Be careful, Belle, this is dangerous. As Belle turned to leave, Eliza grabbed her arm. And Belle, she said, her voice soft but firm, don't let them see you sweat. They want to break you, to make you afraid. Don't give them the satisfaction. That night, under the cloak of darkness, Belle made her way to Moses's cabin. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. She knocked softly on the door, her hand trembling. An elderly man with kind eyes and a weathered face opened the door. You looking for Moses? He asked, his voice a low rumble. Yes, Belle said. Eliza sent me. I have a message for Colonel Turner. Moses ushered her inside. The cabin was small and sparsely furnished, but it felt warm and safe. Belle quickly explained the situation, relaying the details of the Union reconnaissance mission. Moses listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. When she was finished, he nodded slowly. I'll get the message through, he said. But it'll take me most of the night. You best be gone before sunrise. Belle thanked him profusely, her heart filled with gratitude. As she slipped back into the darkness, she knew that she had done everything she could. Now, all she could do was wait and pray. The next morning, Belle awoke with a sense of foreboding. She knew that the Union soldiers would be leaving soon. She watched from her window as they assembled in the town square, their rifles gleaming in the morning sun. Captain Thornton was there, his gaze sweeping the crowd, as if searching for something. Or someone. As the soldiers marched out of town, Belle couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She felt Captain Thornton's eyes on her, even when he wasn't physically present. She knew that he was closing in, that her charade wouldn't last forever. Later that day, General Fremont summoned her to his headquarters. Her stomach clenched. This was it, she thought. He knows. She walked into his office, her head held high, her face a mask of composure. Fremont sat behind his desk, his eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. Miss Boyd, he said, his voice smooth as silk. I've been hearing rumors about you. Belle met his gaze unflinchingly. Rumors, General? What kind of rumors? Rumors of your sympathies, he said, leaning forward. Rumors that you may be aiding the Confederacy. Belle laughed, a light tinkling sound. General, surely you jest. I am a loyal citizen of this country. Are you? Fremont asked, his voice hardening. Or are you a Southern spy using your charms to deceive us? Belle felt a surge of fear, but she refused to show it. General, she said, her voice laced with indignation. I am insulted by your accusations. I have done nothing but cooperate with the Union Army. Fremont studied her for a long moment, his eyes boring into her soul. Perhaps, he said finally. But I will be watching you, Miss Boyd, very closely. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. As Belle walked out of his office, she knew that the game had changed. She was no longer just a shadow, a whisper in the night. She was a target, and the stakes had just been raised. As Belle walked out of his office, she knew that the game had changed. She was no longer just a shadow, a whisper in the night. She was a target, and the stakes had just been raised. The air outside Fremont's headquarters felt thick with suspicion, clinging to her like a shroud. Every soldier's gaze seemed to linger too long. Every hushed conversation felt pointed. Belle clutched her reticule tighter, her knuckles white. She needed to get back to her aunt's boarding house, to think, to plan. Reaching her room, she bolted the door and leaned against it, heart hammering. Fremont's suspicion wasn't entirely unfounded. She was a Confederate sympathizer, and she had been gathering information. But she hadn't seduced anyone, not yet. That was a line she'd always hesitated to cross, even for the cause. A knock at the door startled her. Belle, it's Marie, you all right? Marie was a young woman who helped her aunt with the boarding house. She was also a staunch Unionist, but they'd developed a cautious sort of friendship. Belle composed herself, forcing a smile. Just a bit tired, Marie. What is it? There's a gentleman waiting for you downstairs. Says his name is Captain Danvers. Union Army, Danvers. The name pricked at her memory. She recalled a handsome officer, recently transferred, known for his access to strategic maps. Tell him I'll be down shortly. Belle splashed cold water on her face. This could be trouble or opportunity. Either way, she needed to be sharp. She smoothed her dress, checked her reflection, and took a deep breath. Time to play the part. Downstairs, Captain Danvers stood stiffly in the parlor, his uniform immaculate. He turned as she entered, his blue eyes appraising. Miss Boyd, he greeted, a slight bow. Thank you for seeing me. Captain Danvers, Belle replied, offering her hand. To what do I owe the pleasure? He took her hand, his grip firm. I've been hearing things about you, Miss Boyd. Rumors, whispers. Belle raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. And what sort of rumors might those be, Captain? Rumors of your Southern sympathies, he said, his gaze unwavering. Rumors that you might be more than just a charming young lady. Belle laughed, a delicate sound that belied the tension in her chest. Captain, surely you don't believe everything you hear. I am simply a woman trying to survive in these difficult times. Perhaps, Danvers conceded. But I'm a man who likes to be certain. I have access to information, Miss Boyd. Sensitive information. Information that could significantly impact the war. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. And I'm willing to share it. With the right person. Belle's mind raced. This was it. The opportunity she'd been waiting for, presented on a silver platter. But it came with a price. What would you want in return, Captain? She asked, her voice soft. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Your undivided attention, Miss Boyd, your loyalty. And your affection. Belle met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She knew what he was implying. He wanted her to betray her principles, to use her body as a weapon. But the thought of the Confederacy, of her brother fighting on the front lines, steeled her resolve. Affection is a precious thing, Captain, she said slowly. It cannot be bought or bartered. It must be earned. Danvers smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Then perhaps I'll just have to earn it, Miss Boyd, starting tonight. I'll call for you at 8. He turned and left, leaving Belle standing alone in the parlor, the weight of his proposition heavy on her shoulders. She had a choice to make, a choice that could change the course of the war. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that she would do whatever it took to win. That night, as she prepared for her meeting with Danvers, Belle felt a wave of nausea. She looked at her reflection, seeing not a young woman but a soldier, a spy, a weapon. She had to steel herself to become someone else, someone who could play this dangerous game without losing herself in the process. She donned her most alluring gown, a deep emerald green that accentuated her figure. She carefully applied rouge to her cheeks, making her appear flushed and excited. This was a performance, a charade, and she had to be convincing. When Danvers arrived, he was even more charming than she remembered. He escorted her to a lavish restaurant where they were seated at a secluded table. The conversation flowed easily, Danvers regaling her with stories of his military exploits, Belle listening attentively, interjecting with witty remarks and playful laughter. She could feel his gaze on her, assessing, calculating. He was trying to gauge her sincerity, to see if she was truly falling for his charms. After dinner, Danvers suggested a walk in the park. The moon was full, casting long shadows on the winding paths. As they strolled, he subtly steered the conversation towards military matters, dropping hints about troop movements and strategic plans. Belle listened intently, memorizing every detail, storing it away for future use. Finally, he stopped beneath a towering oak tree, turning to face her. Miss Boyd, he said, his voice low and husky, I believe I'm beginning to earn your affection. Belle looked up at him, her eyes wide and innocent. Perhaps, Captain, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. But you still have much to prove. He leaned in close, his lips brushing her ear. What would you have me do, Miss Boyd? He murmured. Tell me and I'll do anything. Belle took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. I want to see the plans, Captain, she said, her voice firm. I want to see the Union's strategy for the next attack. Danvers hesitated, his expression hardening. "That's a dangerous request, Miss Boyd, one that could have serious consequences." "I'm not afraid of danger, Captain," Belle replied, her gaze unwavering. "Are you?" He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. Finally, he sighed. "Very well, Miss Boyd," he said. "You'll have your plans, but I expect something in return." Belle knew that she had crossed the line. She had agreed to a bargain with the devil, but she also knew that she had no other choice. The fate of the Confederacy, and perhaps her own life, depended on it. Belle walked out of Fremont's office, the general's piercing gaze still burning in her mind. The air outside felt thick with suspicion. She had to act, and act fast. She returned to her lodgings, the laughter of Union soldiers echoing in the streets a mocking soundtrack. Inside, she found her contact, a wiry old woman named Elsie, waiting anxiously. "He suspects," Belle said, her voice low. "Fremont suspects everything." Elsie's eyes widened. "Then we must move the plans tonight. There's a courier leaving for Richmond at dawn." "And the general?" Belle asked. "He'll have me watched." "Then we use his weakness against him," Elsie said, a cunning glint in her eye. "He still desires you, child." "Use that," Belle hesitated. The thought of using her charm again, of feigning affection for a man she despised, felt repugnant. But the Confederacy, her home, depended on it. That evening, Belle dressed in her finest gown, a deep crimson that accentuated her dark hair and piercing blue eyes. She requested an audience with General Fremont, claiming she needed to clarify some misunderstandings. He received her in his private quarters, a decanter of whiskey and 2 glasses already set out on a mahogany table. "Miss Boyd," he said, a flicker of something that might have been relief crossing his face. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" "General," Belle began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "I was deeply hurt by your accusations this morning. I understand your caution, but I assure you, my loyalty lies with this nation." She moved closer, her hand brushing against his. Perhaps I haven't been as forthcoming as I could be. I fear I've been misled by certain individuals." Fremont's eyes narrowed, but the flicker of desire remained. "Misled?" "Yes," Belle purred. "Individuals who prey on my naivete." She leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. "I wouldn't want to make any further mistakes, General. Perhaps you could guide me? Show me the truth?" He was hooked. As Fremont launched into a self-serving lecture about the righteousness of the Union cause, Belle subtly steered the conversation towards the upcoming troop movements. She feigned ignorance, asking innocent-sounding questions that revealed the information she needed. As he spoke, she noticed a map case carelessly left on his desk, the invasion plans resting inside. "It was now or never." "General," she said, her voice trembling, I need some air. All this talk of war, it's overwhelming." Fremont, lost in his own self-importance, barely noticed. "Of course, Miss Boyd. I'll escort you to the balcony." As he turned, Belle swiftly snatched the plans, concealing them beneath her voluminous skirt. She followed him onto the balcony, the cool night air a welcome contrast to the suffocating heat of the room. "Thank you, General," she said, her voice regaining its composure. "I feel much better now." She made her excuses and departed, Fremont's eyes lingering on her as she left. Back in her lodgings, Elsie was waiting. Belle unfolded the plans, her heart pounding. "It's done," she said, handing them over. "But it's cost me." "Something," Elsie nodded, her face grim. "War always does, child. War always does." The courier left for Richmond at dawn, carrying the stolen plans. Belle knew that she had played her part, but the cost was heavy. She had used her womanhood as a weapon, manipulated and deceived. The faces of the Union soldiers, their trust betrayed, haunted her. The Confederacy won a crucial victory thanks to the stolen plans, but the victory felt hollow to Belle. She was hailed as a hero, the siren of the Shenandoah, but the cheers felt like a condemnation. She continued to serve as a spy, but the light had gone out of her eyes. The bravado was gone, replaced by a deep weariness. She saw the war not as a glorious cause, but as a brutal tragedy, tearing apart families and destroying lives. The war eventually ended, and the South lay in ruins. Belle, her reputation forever tarnished, found herself adrift. She tried to rebuild her life, but the shadow of her past clung to her like a shroud. Years later, Belle Boyd, no longer the fiery young spy, stood alone in a quiet cemetery. She knelt before a simple headstone, the name Fremont etched into the granite. She had never revealed his role in her success, protecting his reputation even as her own lay in tatters. She placed a single white rose on the grave, a silent gesture of remorse and understanding. The war had made them both victims, pawns in a game of power and betrayal. As she turned to leave, she saw a young girl, no older than she had been when the war began, watching her from a distance. The girl's eyes were filled with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Belle met her gaze, a sad smile playing on her lips. She knew that the stories would continue to be told, the legends embellished. She would forever be remembered as the Confederate spy, the seductress, the prostitute of the South. But in that moment, as she looked into the eyes of the young girl, Belle hoped that one day someone would see beyond the legend, to the woman who had been forced to make impossible choices in a world consumed by war. She turned and walked away, her figure silhouetted against the setting sun.